Let's speak with Connie Shaw, Leeds University student, free speech advocate, commentator for the Women's Rights Network, and has been on the receiving end of a drop of cancel culture. Connie, good afternoon to you.
Hello, yes. So when I was suspended from my committee role at Leeds Student Radio, I was accused of putting the health and safety of other students at risk. And that's very similar to the language of the Labour Party and Bridget Phillipson when they originally decided to shelve HEFSFA because they thought that it could open students up to harm because they might be hearing opinions that they disagree with. But, you know, that, like you said, is a completely unfounded claim because the original HEFSA was not going to remove any existing laws that we have to prevent hate speech. It was not going to protect unlawful speech. What I do find quite annoying about what Bridget Phillipson is doing is that it's being branded as a U-turn, but it's not a U-turn at all because it's this watered down version, essentially making it an empty piece of legislation because they're removing clause 4 from the original Tory version of HEFSA, which would have meant that individuals had entitlement for legal backing to take their civil cases to county courts against their higher education institutions. Yeah. But now it's just going to be regulated by the Office for Students, which doesn't have any statutory power. So without the clause 4, this Labour's version of HEFSFA will basically have no more power than any other existing laws that already tell universities that they have to uphold freedom of speech. So in that way, if this law is passed, nothing really is going to change that much for universities. The reason why Bridget Phillipson is doing this is because, like you say, she's under a lot of pressure from esteemed academics who have been very angry about this shelving, and also from organisations such as the Free Speech Union, which have initiated judicial review, which is going ahead next week against her decision to shelve the Act. But also, Bridget Phillipson is under a lot of pressure from universities themselves who are lobbying against this clause 4 because they simply cannot afford to pay for litigation for people who bring cases against them. And this whole thing sort of encapsulates the way that our university system is so messed up because universities are literally, they cannot afford to uphold freedom of speech because, you know, a big factor in this as well is because they rely on fees of international students, almost 1/5 of which come from China. And obviously, the Chinese government and students who might be wrapped up in things that might be going on in China are not going to be in favour of freedom of speech laws coming in. So the universities have to weigh up the financial costs of this and upholding freedom of speech, which is obviously a ridiculous position to be in. But yeah, it's just very annoying that this is being branded as a U-turn because I think Bridget Phillipson is not doing a U-turn. She is trying to satisfy both sides without actually doing anything at all. Yeah. She's not upholding freedom of speech because this new version of HEFSA's watered down HEFSA is not going to have any real power, which was the whole reason it was brought in the first place. I
was going to say, without the clause 4 bit, that was the bit that, to coin a phrase, that was the bit that gave it the balls, right? I mean, that was the bit that kind of made the difference. Without that, it becomes a fairly arbitrary kind of situation where you're back to phase 1, where a university could still go, well, actually, we don't want this person, or we think there's going to be a problem. You could make up or invent any kind of reason for that. You know, we've heard on the grapevine there's going to be a riot if we get Mickey McDougall to come and speak about his terrorist sympathies or something. You could pretty much say anything and still get away with it. So your fear, I'm assuming then, Connie, is that we end up in exactly the same situation where programmes like mine will be sitting here on a weekly basis talking about people who are banned from a university.
I genuinely do not see what power this new version of HEFSA will have if it doesn't have clause 4 in it. And I think it's just, you know, we know what this government's attitude is towards freedom of speech.
Sure.
You know, locking people up for Facebook posts, being more bothered about the way that people talk about the grooming gang scandal than the realities of the scandal itself. And now the proposed extension of the Workers' Protection Act, which might mean that punters are banned from talking about controversial topics in pubs. The Labour government are not doing this because they care about freedom of speech. Simply, they are under a lot of pressure because, freedom of speech has almost been at the core of nearly every social issue that this government has had to deal with so far. Yeah. And it's basically just a token piece of legislation that some people might think that they're doing something about it, but when it comes down to it, they're not.
Yeah.
So to call it U-turn is that is not correct.
Indeed, and you mentioned pubs, a story we talked about yesterday as well. Social media, goodness knows where else, the workplace. We see these kind of stories all the time. Just give us a flavour, Connie. I mean, you became to some students someone that was, you were public enemy number one to some people for, sort of having the temerity to have sort of outrageous views on gender. But by the way, spoiler alert, your views are the ones that everybody on the planet had 20 minutes ago, but for some reason we've all shifted into some other gear. No one quite knows who orchestrated that, but that's where we're at. In terms of the kind of life on the campus, I mean, what is it like for students? Is there a genuine sense you have to be careful what you say? I mean, we heard Mo, our previous contributor, make reference to the ostracising of some students, which I think there's been some terrible examples of what happens when a student's been ostracised and accused of something, where a group of friends say, look, we're not going to talk to you for 6 weeks. We think that's the best way to do it. Almost like a kind of I don't like the sort of the village gathering around with pitchforks saying, this is your punishment that we're giving you for having unpleasant views. Is there an underpinning or an overwhelming sense that, you have to watch what you say at uni?
Absolutely. And it's a shame because on one hand, I thought my experience and being public about it might encourage more people to speak out. But actually, I've received a lot of private messages from people saying that they would love to support me publicly, but they're too scared about what might happen to them. And I think that because I have been made an example of, it actually might scare more students into silence. Because it was always the unknown, I'm scared of what might happen if I speak out. They've seen what happens now when someone speaks out, and so I think it might be 50-50. Some people will be now more brave to speak out, others will be scared into silence even more so because I've been made an example of. But when you say about what it's like now to go back to campus, I'm not sure how I feel about going back to uni now. I don't know what it's going to be like. I'm sure that most people won't care, but we'll see what it's like, what the climate is like when I go back.
And just remind everybody, this was a gender-based issue, wasn't it? That you had a comment. What was the comment you made, or what was it that they felt you represented that was so distasteful, where people lost their minds?
Often with these cases, I was not told what it was exactly that I had said.
Oh, for God's sake. That makes it even worse, right? I mean, that really is another territory.
I was told the reason why I'd been suspended was as a result of my social media, my media productions and my Substack. I asked for them to detail specifics so that I could effectively defend myself when it came to the interview, and they could not give me any specifics. I actually, even though I was accused of putting the health and safety of other students at risk, that allegation was dropped, but I was still permanently removed from my position. Because I had brought Leeds Student Radio into disrepute, apparently. I also have not been told how I have done that. So, yes.
So you still don't know specifically?
Well, I can imagine it's because I said that I don't think men can be women, and that I think that adult human females.
Yeah.
I mean, you can even see, it was only the other day that Exeter University's student newspaper published an article on me on which they made it very clear that they think that my views are hateful and transphobic. And they said, the LGBTQ Society at Exeter said that they would not accept comments such as mine on a student radio station. They said that I wouldn't be deserved. They even said that they were annoyed at the student newspaper for giving someone like me with such hateful and transphobic views a platform.
So views that most people believe and think. As I mentioned a moment ago, it would have been controversial to have any other view than that, a little while ago. And yet so entrenched as this newfound kind of, I don't know, people use this phrase virtue signalling, but it's kind of in that ballpark or whatever it happens to be, this sense of decency, this misplaced sort of synthetic outrage that comes around over people saying something that really is not controversial, but deciding to articulate or represent it as being as hateful as it gets. I mean, it's a sort of a wholly anti-intellectual position, Connie, right? I mean, it's dangerous and it's completely mad.
I'm hopeful that when these students who act, because it is a loud minority, I do not believe that the majority of students seriously think that I'm a hateful person. To reiterate, all it is that I believe is that women are adult human females. But, I was hoping that when these students leave university, like you said, they'll go into the real world and realise that actually a lot of people don't believe that men can become women. But I'm also concerned because I know that a lot of grad schemes that are looking for the next generation of students are really pandering to this stuff. I did a paid survey where I rated adverts for graduate jobs, and nearly all of the leaflets are expressing how they're inclusive and how they're LGBTQ friendly and they respect people's gender identities. We know what that means now.
Yeah.
And that means a suppression on speech and a suppression of women's rights. And so I'm concerned that corporations are going to pander to this next generation of students.
Well, there is that. So, and some, I think we could reasonably say already have. But, we'll watch with interest. And hopefully there is momentum behind what you're saying and others. Listen, Connie, let's speak again. Great to have you on. Thank you, Connie Shaw, free speech advocate from University of Leeds. She's been in the sharp end of those that decide to define disagreement as hate speech, and therefore you shouldn't be allowed to have that opinion. But where is the line on free speech? 0344 499 1000.